Hello everyone, today I'd like to talk about ska punk. Now, my very first exposure to ska punk was, and I think a lot of people's as well, in the mainstream, would have been No Doubt. And that album Tragic Kingdom, that came out in the mid 90s. And the song I heard from there was Spiderwebs. When I first heard that song, that was like the most freshest song I've ever heard. It was like so different. Um, if you know Spiders, you can remember the song, or you just go ahead and play it. You know, it had that intro, that horn intro that's so like calypso like, and then once it gets that, it gets into the kind of like that guitar riff and more of an upbeat tempo, and then but the horn's still playing like not just one horn, but like a group of horns, and it's very distinctive, and it's something I never ever heard before. When I was a kid growing up, that's like the very first song that I can remember that. Whoa, what is this? What is this? This is so cool. And that kind of got me into, well, I didn't know how to explain what that was. It was just different. And then I remember borrowing the CD, Tragic Kingdom. I think there may have been another song or so that sounded similar, but um, by then, No Doubt was more of a pop rock rather than a ska punk band. They went really mainstream. But Spiderwebs was, and that was a popular song. That hit the top 40. I remember that really well. That song was actually played on mainstream top 40 radio. So when I heard it, I didn't know what to expect. I was like, man, this is awesome. Even though for No Doubt, the song "Don't Speak" was probably the most famous and probably the most popular from No Doubt. To me, Spiderwebs was my song from No Doubt. So it wasn't until like a year or so later, it was not too long. The Boss Tones came, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and they had the song "The Impression That I Get," and that song was also popular. I think it might have been played on mainstream top 40 radio, but more so in the alt rock, that those stations. And then I listened to those back and forth from time to time, but I definitely would hear The Impression That I Get. And I really like that too. And the very first thing when I first heard that song, The Impression That I Get, was Spiderwebs, because it had that same vibe. It had the horn section playing like, it's very distinctive. It's very distinctive. So I was like, whoa, they probably just ripped off Spiderwebs and made a different type of song or something like that. So I was like, but with the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, when that song came out, that's when I heard the term ska for the first time. And I do recall it just being ska, the term ska, not ska punk or anything. The DJ at the time when that song was playing, he mentioned that this is a ska song, and maybe the term ska punk was not popular or even made at that time, so everyone's just using ska. But either way, it's the first time I ever heard the term ska. Now, just a quick thing, if you're not into ska or don't know much about it, like I don't know much about it, but I do know this. Ska originated from Jamaica, the ska. So, and it's kind of defined by the horns. So even the ska punk and stuff you hear today, the influence was from the Jamaican, like calypso music I mentioned, kind of mixed with reggae and things like that. That's ska from the 50s and 60s. From what I understand, there's another ska that fits in between that's from the UK, that originated from the UK, but I don't know much about it. I don't know any albums, songs, or bands from that period of UK ska, so I don't know anything about that. The ska I know is the Ska Punk, which is US based and 90s driven, like 90s US based music and all the way through till today. So that's when I first heard the term ska. And then I was like, well, I really like this music. From Spiderwebs to the impression that I get. I went and was lucky to borrow the CD from the library. They had the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And when I played that album, it first of all, that album taught me what the ska punk sound is like. As I mentioned before, their horns are the uniqueness of the horns. It's very now all kinds of music, all kinds of genres of music have horns or can use horns, but for ska punk, it's very signature. There's no breaking from it. When you hear that type of sound, it's almost a vibe on its own. It's very distinctive. You know once you hear it, you know it's ska or ska like. Okay, and with ska punk, it adds the elements of punk. Now I'm not a big fan of punk per se, but it's like putting ska and the horns together with punk music, kind of like the upbeat, up-tempo punk style, especially with the singing and the guitar playing. You could tell the guitar playing is pretty fast but distinctive. There's like a bit of fuzzy, that punk style guitar playing. So kind of colliding together, and you get ska punk. And after hearing the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, that album, I had a pretty good understanding of what ska punk is as a genre of music. Now, when I heard the whole album from Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, I didn't like it at all. Besides the impression that I get, I thought every song sounded similar, and similar to that song itself. I'm not talking about the genre as a whole, so comparing to other songs from other groups. Not only that, it seemed like a watered down, crappy version of the impression that I get. And usually if there's a song or two that I like from an album, when I borrow from the library, I would like rip it. But this is one of the few ones that I didn't rip it at all, because after listening to it, I didn't like it. I didn't really like it. And then ever since then, I think that was like late 90s, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. I don't think I ever heard any other ska punk song since then, either on popular radio or even the alt rock radio. I think Sublime, I could be wrong, maybe Sublime had a song. I don't know the title, but I do know they're a ska punk band, and I'm pretty sure I heard a song from them on popular radio or like you would hear on the radio station. But outside of that, I don't think I ever heard any other ska punk song. So after a while, I'd say from the mid 2000s on, I totally forgot about this genre, ska punk. And even if I did recall or maybe hear a song like in a movie or something that had ska like horns or ska punk like sound, I never really got it wasn't my thing. So until this Big Real Fish. And I got this album from a garage sale. Now, when I picked this album up, it was one of those things where I didn't really want to get it, because when I didn't know who this band was at all. And I started looking it up, doing my research, and it's a ska punk band. And I'm like, okay, I put it back down. But I couldn't help it because a lot of people, when I read reviews, like they for ska punk fans, they really recommend this band. This is the band that most people like die for or they vouch for this band. Okay, there's other bands as well, but this one was it. This is pretty much unanimous. So I'm like, okay, and it said the best of us. So what the heck? This is greatest hits. So I went ahead and bought it, and I like this too because it was a double disc. The first one is their greatest hits. The second disc was acoustic. They call it ska acoustic, but whatever. So my impression before playing this was going to be something similar to the impression I had a long time ago with the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and that I wasn't going to like it. But after putting the first disc on, the first song is they're probably their most famous, "Sellout." I kind of recognize it. Maybe it wasn't this song. Maybe it was another different song from a different group, but it sounded similar. But I actually, when I first heard the song, I really liked it. And not only just the sound and the playing, but the lyrics too. It's kind of funny. And then the next song was a cover, "Take on Me" by Aha. It was a cover of that. Funny, if you watch my videos, I made a video on Aha's Take on Me. Go watch that. That's one of my popular disliked videos. But anyway, so now when I heard the Take on Me, their version of it, their cover version, look at the album cover. It's pretty. I actually liked it. It was impressive. I was like, whoa. I had to, when it finished, I had to repeat that before going on a couple times. And then from there on, I played the rest of it. Now, here's the thing. Played the whole album out. And for me, they're hit and misses in a sense. There's maybe a third of the songs on their greatest hits that I didn't really like. But the rest were either decent, pretty good, listenable, and very enjoyable. I really liked. And I think taking into totality, I thought this group and this album and their hit songs were good. I thought, well, wow, I had a totally different impression, pun intended, I guess, than the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones album. And I understand that's just an album, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, not a greatest hits like this. So maybe Mighty Mighty Boss Tones greatest hits might give me a better impression. I don't know, but yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, put it this way, of listening to this whole album. And I listened to their second disc, Ska Acoustics, their more acoustic stuff. I thought it was okay. I actually like the ska punk style than the acoustic style more so. I'm not saying it's bad or anything, but I just actually prefer the ska punk, the original stuff. Now, from what I understand, reading about this after playing this a couple times, this greatest hits album is actually a re-recording of all their hits, and I guess from what I understand that they broke away from their label, and obviously, most likely than not, they don't own their songs, and then they had to just re-record everything. So they had either a different label, their own label they created, and then they had to re-record everything. Now, when I read that, I was thinking to myself, usually re-recordings of songs don't sound as good as the originals. Maybe because you heard the originals first and then the re-recordings. But in some cases, for me, most of the time re-recordings suck because either the background music, the original music itself, gets diluted, or it's not it doesn't sound as good. It's not necessarily the vocals or anything. It's just the music being played is just not as good. And or the vocals seem more tamed down. The singing, that kind of thing is just tamed down. Now, I don't have the luxury of ever listening to their original song. So most likely, because this is the first time I heard this group and their songs from this particular album, I wouldn't know. There's nothing for me to compare. But either way, and then I started listening to the original songs on YouTube and streaming, and I don't know. I can't really tell the difference. That's a good thing. I can't really tell the difference from their original recordings with their record label to their re-recordings. But it also seems like their re-recordings sound a bit better. Now, it could be a production thing, but I think in here, there seems to be quite a bit more energy with the songs they were re-recording. It seems like there's a lot more energy. And now that could also be ska punk because that's pretty, up-tempo. There's supposed to be energy involved with the sound and everything, right? So that could be part of it, but just in general, the way they sung it, things like that, there seems to be more lively, more upbeat, more energy to it. And when I compared, I think that's the case with their original versions of their songs. And that's why I think this ain't bad at all. This is, even if it's a re-recording, it's not bad at all. I mean, if anything, it might be better than, some of it at least, some better than the original recording. So, to sum things up, I'm not gonna ever say I'm a ska punk fan. If for ska punk as a music genre, it'll probably be my bottom third in a totem pole of music genres. Now, I listen to all kinds of music genres, world music as well, so I have quite a bit of list of genres I can rank. And again, ska punk in general would be probably my bottom one third that I would, in a sense of, if I had to listen to and rank what I would listen to first, ska punk would probably be in my one third. Now, it wouldn't be all the way in the bottom. All the way in the bottom would probably be like heavy metal, deathcore, that kind of stuff. I don't listen to that. But ska punk itself is something that if I had to choose of like a list, if given a list of like 5 or 10 music genres, ska punk would probably be in the bottom third of what I would select. But at the end of the day, even having said that, this group, Real Big Fish, changed my perspective on ska punk. Now, again, getting into ska punk was No Doubt's Spiderwebs, and I still love that song. That's my favorite song from No Doubt. That got me into the sound of ska punk. Mighty Mighty Boss Tones is The Impression I Get, got me to understanding the sound and the vibe of ska punk, but not necessarily being a fan of it per se, especially listening to the whole album. This, I can officially say, kind of got me into ska punk. Now, does that mean that I'm going to go and buy every ska punk album like from different artists? Probably not. I mean, I got streaming and stuff like that. But if I see something like Less Than Jake is another group, a ska punk group that's pretty popular. I think Operation Ivy, but that's maybe hard to obtain. But if I see bands like that, but it would have to be greatest hits. If I see something like that, I wouldn't hesitate to buy it, because what this group has showed me, that ska punk is definitely a viable genre. That as a kid originally, outside of 1 or 2 songs, I didn't think it was even worth listening to. But these guys proved me wrong. And if you want to get into ska punk, I think what I just mentioned is the way. If you listen to Spiderwebs from No Doubt, and maybe The Impression I Get from Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, if you listen to those 2 songs and you have an inkling that you may like it, or you are interested, then I think getting into something like Real Big Fish is an absolute perfect way to get into ska punk. And I'm pretty sure you'll like this group if you happen to like the first 2 songs I mentioned. So, anyway, this is my kind of take on ska punk. Pleasantly surprising, especially this group. Doesn't mean that I'm going to like all the other groups that are in that genre, but I could definitely recommend this. And hey, it's a good thing. All right. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Bye.